could have belonged to the Catholic Church really fast, couldn't I?
Because you were called sister, not Carly.
No, they didn't call me. My mother, my brother, my dad all called me sister.
But when they wanted you, when you were in trouble, what would they call you?
I don't remember.
Because you never got in trouble?
No.
Or would they call you Carolee or Carly?
My mother called me Carly. If she got mad at me, she would say Carly.
Okay.
You seen the picture of the little girl standing in the corner over there?
Yeah.
With a dog near her?
Okay.
Reminded me of my first dog my dad gave me, named what do they call him? Had a patch over his eye. Looked like the what do you call it, dog?
Yeah.
I called him Spooky.
Oh.
Spooky.
Kind of like the RCA dog, or?
Yeah, it looked a lot like the RCA dog. That dog's in the corner too.
Oh.
The little girl had broke a glass.
Yeah.
So go stand in the corner. You talk out at school, the teacher will say, come up here and stand in the corner. No, that you don't want to happen at school because that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
To stand in the corner.
Yeah.
It's a put down. You did wrong today in class or something, or you're doing something wrong in class, teacher will say, you come stand in the corner.
Huh.
That was the day, that was what they did back then. So the little girl had, you probably can't see it very well, but she had dropped a glass. It's on the floor.
So she's in the corner.
She's in the corner.
Okay.
And the dog's standing with her. He said, what she does, I do. Isn't that right, Pepper?
So Charles Howland was a Christian, went to church in Scottsburg, lived in Sargent.
No,
Scottsbluff.
Sargent.
He lived in Sargent, went to church in Scottsbluff.
No, he went to church in Sargent.
Oh, both lived and went to church in Sargent.
I did.
Okay.
But so, my family stayed in Sargent.
And you didn't want to ride around in his Model T? That was old school, huh?
I did enough of that, but all the kids in Sunday school wanted to ride in Grandpa Howland's Model T Ford. And when he started it, he would have to crank it.
Really?
And he never built the garage close enough to the house. They always worried about your car. They didn't want the cars being near the garage. He was afraid it might explode. Something happened to it. So the garage was a long ways from the house, but it was just for the car to pull into.
Huh.
And then he had to walk to get to the car.
Did your grandpa ever talk about his parents or his grandparents to you?
He was born in New Hampshire.
Charles
was not far from Man of the Mountain. I don't know if you know who the Man of the Mountain was.
No.
That was a rock formation that looked like a man. All this, and for years they always knew where Man of the Mountain was. Now it is worn away, and it's no longer referred to in New Hampshire somewhere.
Would he describe his mom or dad to you?
Huh?
Did he ever just tell you about his mom or dad?
Not that I know of. I can't remember if he did. My mother made one trip back to New Hampshire and saw the old Man of the Mountain.
Oh.
And talked about that. My dad went to the World's Fair in Chicago.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
What year was that?
Oh, it had to have been in the 1800s.
Wow.
And
Did he tell you anything about it?
let me tell you, my mother told me something about it, and my dad was insulted. My grandpa was insulted. He went to the World's Fair by himself. His grandma died the year I was born. She had told my mother she didn't want to ever see her have any more children because she had a hard time with Orlin when he was born. They thought he was born stillborn, but he was all right. It was just that she was tore up pretty bad, and she should have had a C-section with my brother, because she continued to ride horses when they lived on my grandmother's. What do you call it? She was both of my grandparents got a homestead from the government. Government gave homesteads.
This is before the Dust Bowl.
Yeah, and the homesteads were to be kept up and worked on, and taxes paid into the state of Nebraska. And my grandmother's homestead was on the south side of the North Loop River, and my grandfather was Grandpa was on the north side, and Grandma was on the south side. And they both went to the Christian church, and I imagine that's how they met. Grandma, all she'd have to do is drive from her homestead to the main entrance from Shadron, or Nebraska. You go along that Nebraska highway, and then you go north to Sargent. I don't remember what the name of the town is. We passed through it when we went to Nauvoo. But anyway, when I went to the church in Sargent, I'd usually sit. I wouldn't sit with Grandpa. He always sat up front. I sit in the back row because I wanted to hear them sing "Right in the corner where you are." And it wasn't right in the corner. It was bright in the corner where you are. And my mother, and I used to think they were singing "Right in the corner where you are."
So you sit in the corner, huh?
I was sitting in the corner of the church, yeah.
Okay.
And instead of brightening it, I was right in the corner. It's funny how we remember some of these stupid little things.
It is.
I did.
Yeah, I misunderstood certain songs.
So bright in the corner.
Yeah, there was a song called Elvira.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought they were saying, "Hell, fire up."
I graduated with a girl whose name was Elvira.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
sometimes we just...
You don't hear the right sound of the words, do you?
I don't have the best hearing. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, which grandpa was in the north side of the loop? Grandpa last name. What's the last name?
Howland.
And in the south? Grandpa?
No, Grandma.
Grandma?
Wright.
Grandma Wright. And so that's how those two met at the same church.
Yeah.
And then they did that.
And they got married.
Okay.
And
then she died when you never knew her then.
I never knew her. She died in the spring of 1930. And she passed away. She was it turned into quite a heavy woman. And my dad said he loved my grandmother because she treated him so well. She was so good to my dad. And he and my Uncle Sam remained good friends. Except of all the brothers and sisters my mother had, the only one that stayed active in the First Christian Church was Samuel. He was a very religious man, and he stayed with the First Christian Church. And the rest of them sort of drifted away. I'm not saying their kids didn't go to church in the Christian church, because they did. I know my cousins, my Aunt Elsie's kids went to church in First Christian Church, and Grandpa Howland lived near Anselmo, Nebraska. Grandpa Campbell was a horse breeder, bred horses. And he gave one to my brother, and his name was Red. And my dad rode Red in a horse race in Sargent one year when it was during Sargent days. And Brother Udall asked me if my dad won that day, and I was so small, I remember two things. My mother handed me up to my dad after the race, and there were balloons above me. I was interested in the balloons that was attached to something.
Yeah.
And two things about the horse: the heat from the horse's body and the smell of the horse. I still remember from time I was just real little. And I told this to Dr. Udall, and he was more interested in my dad won the race. He could have easily, because he's the one that had the balloons, and I was the one riding him in the whatever parade it was, and I was more interested in the balloons.
Yeah.
He could have won.
Yeah.
My grandpa had raced. I have a picture of my grandpa with two of the horses that he had bred.
Oh, were these race horses?
Huh?
These were race horses? Or just raised? He just raised them?
Well, they were all, the Campbells are all interested in the Kentucky Derbies.
Oh, were they?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I went to a Kentucky Derby.
That's great.
In 1980.
1980? Did you enjoy watching a horse race?
I thought it was Sodom and Gomorrah in the middle. As a missionary, there's a lot of wild stuff going on in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
Of that.
Oh, yeah.
That environment. It's not.
I'm sure.
It's not a kid-friendly environment.
The Campbells were always interested in the horse races in the Kentucky Derby.
Huh.
They even would have. They would even bet on some of the horses.
Yeah.
Even as far away as they were from Kentucky.
Huh.
And they had their favorites in the Kentucky Derby.
You know, I was part of a Kashari Explorer Post, and we would watch the Kentucky Derby every May. You know, that was always a fun on TV.
Well, it was on radio back then, and they would sit around the radio and all jazz for their favorite horse that they thought would win.
Did hear it called over the radio, huh?
Yeah, it was the radio shows they listened to.
Huh.
And my mother, though she may not have realized it, listened to Lawrence Welk when he was in South Dakota, in that town on the east side of South Dakota. What was it called? He was a regular there at that one radio station, and my mother used to turn it to that for the news all the time. If you look to the west of the map in South Dakota, you'll probably see the town of South Dakota. And we got that station comes in really plain, and that's how my mother would listen to that station and to Lawrence Welk. And Lawrence Welk traveled, even in one of his shows, said he traveled through Nebraska, and one of the best singers there, whose last name was the same as Gene Finney, his name was Finney, was from Grand Island, Nebraska, went to the University of Nebraska, and they joined Lawrence Welk and was on his show until practically all his life. And his son, as a little boy, sang in Lawrence Welk's arms, sang a little duet, and he was no more than 4 or 5 years old.
Oh, okay.
He grew up to sing on the opera in New York.
Very good.
And his father sang with Lawrence Welk, Joe Finney. Joe Finney. And Joe Goodell married Jean Finney. I've often wondered if Jean Finney was in relation to Joe Finney, who was from Grand Island, Nebraska.
There you go.
I don't know. Who knows these things?
Yeah. So did your grandpa ever remarry after your grandma died when you were little?
Howland?
Yes.
No, but he sure went to the dances.
Okay.
He danced with a few of them.
Okay.
And there was one, I guess, that was interested in him, but he, no, he never married again. He was too busy raising chickens and the little teeny apples, making
crab apples or
crab apple, whatever they did with crab apples.
So he was good with beans, baked beans, and crab apples.
When the members of the Christian church gathered around the picnic table, out would come my mother. My mother had always watched. Grandpa had those beans soaking for a day or so, and then they baked overnight in this big wood stove he had. Then my mother would go to, on the day they had the picnics, my mother would go and keep tab on the baked beans, and then my mother would carry out Grandpa's baked beans, and everybody'd say, "Oh, we've been waiting all year for Grandpa's great baked beans."
Very good.
And the pot would hardly go all around, so
everybody
could have it. Yeah, but he made a big pot of baked beans, and nobody really knew what the
recipe was.
What the recipe was, but he kept that a secret.
He never wrote it down for you, huh?
Well, I don't know. I never got it. My mother might have known what it was, but I didn't know. Too young and to really care.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I ever got any baked beans or not. I was probably interested in something else. I don't know. Yeah. But everybody would bring their favorite dish, set it on the table, and then everybody make their helping. Grandpa's baked beans didn't make the round. They weren't people. Yeah. People loved his baked beans.
Very good.